What does it take for a man like Jack Nicklaus to admit he wasn't the best? For decades, Jack Nicklaus was the standard of golf. Control, precision, mental strength, the player everyone else had to adjust to. But even a legend remembers the moments he couldn't control. In this documentary, we uncover the 5 golfers who forced Jack Nicklaus to see the game differently. Not just great players, not just champions, but men who in their own way were better. Not in titles, not in records, but in the moments that mattered most. From silent rivalries to unforgettable duels, from control to chaos. This is the story behind the 5 men Jack Nicklaus could never ignore. Watch until the end, because the final name changes everything. What happens when the man who defined greatness no longer claims it? What does it mean when a name like Jack Nicklaus, a name built on control, precision, inevitability, looks back and quietly says, "There were others better than him"? Not 1, 5, and not louder men, not more famous men, better. Pause. But better? How? Better under pressure, better in moments that refused control, better in ways even he could not explain. Because Jack Nicklaus did not lose often, and when he did, it stayed with him, not the loss. The feeling. There were moments, after the crowd was gone, after the noise disappeared, when the scoreboard no longer mattered, and Jack would not look at the winner's name. He would look at the man who beat him. Pause. Not with frustration, not with anger, with recognition, and that is where this story begins. Because this is not a list of the greatest golfers. This is something else. This is about 5 men who made Jack Nicklaus question his own control. 5 men he could not fully predict. 5 men he could not always contain. And in the end, the 5 people he respected the most. There was a time when the game did not need explanation. You could feel it just by watching him walk. Jack Nicklaus did not arrive with noise. He did not need to. The galleries did not lean forward because he was unpredictable. They leaned forward because they knew exactly what was coming, and still, they could not stop it. Pause. He did not chase moments. He controlled them. In an era where pressure lived in silence, not headlines, he became something rare. Not just a champion, a standard. Courses did not defeat him. They revealed him. Every fairway felt narrower, every green heavier. Because when Jack stood over the ball, everything slowed down. Other players played the field. Jack played expectation, and almost always won. Pause. But what made him different was not how often he won. It was how little he gave away. No wasted motion, no visible doubt, no need to prove anything beyond the next shot. While others chased brilliance, he built something colder, something repeatable, something that did not break. And that is why other players adjusted to him. They played safer, or they forced risks they would never normally take, because they knew one thing. If Jack stayed within himself, the tournament was closing. Pause. And yet, even within that control, there were moments that did not follow the pattern. Moments where someone else did not bend. Moments he never forgot. Number 5. The man who refused to fade. Tom Watson. There are players you can outplay over time, and then there are players who don't need time. Tom Watson did not look like a threat. Not at first. He did not control the room. He did not carry the same weight. But that was never the danger. Pause. The danger was timing. Watson never chased the round. He waited, and when the moment arrived, he didn't hesitate. There were Sundays when Jack did everything right. Every fairway, every green. The kind of golf that usually ends tournaments. And still, it wasn't enough. Pause. Because Watson wasn't missing. At Turnberry, 1977, Jack played one of the greatest rounds of his life. Watson matched it, shot for shot, and then went one step further, not because Jack failed, but because Watson chose the moment to be perfect. And that is something you cannot control. Number 4, Lee Trevino. There are players you can measure, and then there are players who don't fit into anything you measure. Lee Trevino was never supposed to trouble Jack Nicklaus the way he did. He didn't look like him, didn't move like him, didn't even think about the game the same way. Where Jack was quiet, Trevino talked. Where Jack calculated, Trevino reacted. And at first, that looked like a weakness. It wasn't. It was the problem. Because Jack built his game on predictability. Not boring predictability. Controlled predictability. The kind that lets you see the round before it happens. The kind that removes chaos. One decision at a time. Trevino brought the chaos back. Not recklessly. Comfortably. And that's where it became dangerous. Because Jack could read most players. He could feel when they were tightening up. He could sense when pressure started to leak into their swing. That was part of his advantage. Against Trevino, that signal never came. He looked the same. Whether he was leading, chasing, or one swing away from losing everything, he smiled. He talked. And then he hit shots that didn't belong to the situation. But they worked. And that's where it shifted. Because once a player proves he can win outside the system stops protecting you. There were moments, especially in majors, when Jack did everything the right way. The way that had carried him through the hardest courses, the toughest fields, the longest Sundays. And Trevino would still be there. Not overpowering him. Not outplaying him in the traditional sense. Just refusing to follow the same rules. At the U.S. Open at the Open Championship, there were rounds where Jack stayed inside his structure, trusting that over time it would break anyone who tried to match him. Trevino didn't break. He bent the moment instead. He would take a shot that didn't look right, until it landed exactly where it needed to be. He would choose a line that made no sense, until it changed the hole entirely. And Jack could not fully prepare for that. Because how do you plan against something that does not repeat? How do you control a player who is comfortable being unpredictable? That is a different kind of pressure. Not loud, not obvious, but constant. And over time, Jack understood it. There are players you beat by being better. And then there are players who force you to play a game you didn't choose. Lee Trevino was one of them. Number 3, Seve Ballesteros. There are players you can figure out if you give it enough time. And then there are players who make time irrelevant. Seve Ballesteros did not arrive as part of the system. He did not grow inside it. He did not wait to understand it before he challenged it. He simply played, and that was the problem. Because Jack Nicklaus understood structure better than anyone. He trusted that over 4 days the right decisions would separate him from everyone else. That discipline was not just his strength, it was his identity. Seve did not share that identity. He saw the same course, and imagined something else. There were holes where the fairway was no longer the safest path, situations where recovery was the only logical option, positions that forced most players to step back, reset, minimize damage. Seve stepped forward, not carelessly, confidently, and that's where it became something Jack could not fully control. Because Jack could prepare for patterns. He could anticipate decisions that made sense. He could position himself for outcomes that followed logic. Seve did not follow logic. He followed instinct. And instinct does not repeat the same way twice. There were shots that should not have existed, angles that should not have been playable, moments where the round should have slipped away, quietly, predictably, and then Seve would change it, not by overpowering the course, but by seeing something in it that others did not. And that's where it shifted. Because when a player succeeds outside the boundaries of the game, the boundaries themselves begin to feel uncertain. Jack could stand over a shot and know exactly what the percentages said. He could trust that the disciplined choice would carry him further than anyone else over time. But what happens when the other player does not care about percentages? What happens when the shot that should not work does? You cannot plan for that. You cannot control it. You can only watch it. And Jack did. Not with frustration, with recognition. Because he understood something very few would admit. There are players who master the game by respecting its limits. And then there are players who move those limits entirely. Seve Ballesteros was one of them. Number 2, Arnold Palmer. There are players you compete against. And then there are players who change what the competition feels like before a single shot is played. By the time Jack Nicklaus stepped fully into his prime, Arnold Palmer was already something else entirely. Not just a champion, not just a rival, a force. You could feel it before he even swung. The galleries did not gather around Palmer the way they did for others. They surged. They followed him from hole to hole as if something important might happen at any moment, even when nothing had happened yet. And that changes things, because Jack built his game on removing noise, on narrowing everything down until the only thing left was the shot in front of him. He did not need energy from the outside. He did not rely on it. Palmer created it, and once it was there, it affected everyone, including Jack. At first it looked like something you could ignore. The cheers, the movement, the way the entire course seemed to lean in one direction when Palmer was in contention. But over time, it became clear. This wasn't distraction. It was pressure. A different kind. Because when Palmer made a move, it didn't stay contained within the scoreboard. It spread. It changed the tempo of the round. It made every moment feel heavier, faster, more urgent. And that's where it shifted. Because Jack could control his swing. He could control his decisions. He could control the way a tournament unfolded over 4 days. But he could not control the atmosphere. There were days when Jack played the better golf. More precise, more complete. The kind of performance that, over time, defines greatness. And yet, the day belonged to Palmer. Not because of the score, because of the feeling. Because, when Palmer stepped into a moment, it became larger than the game itself. The crowd believed something was about to happen, and somehow, that belief turned into reality more often than it should have. Jack never chased that. It was not who he was. His greatness came from something steadier, something quieter, something that did not depend on anyone else. But he saw it. He saw that there was a form of dominance that could not be built through control. It had to be lived, in real time, with everyone watching, and that is something you cannot take from another player. You can only recognize it. There are players who win the game, and then there are players who make the game feel alive. Arnold Palmer was one of them. Number 1, Tiger Woods. There are players who chase a standard, and then there are players who take that standard and move it somewhere else entirely. By the time Tiger Woods arrived, the shape of greatness in golf had already been defined. It had a rhythm, a structure, a way of unfolding over time. Much of that shape came from Jack Nicklaus. Control, patience, endurance. The understanding that over 4 days, the game reveals who you are. Tiger did not reject that. He absorbed it, and then he accelerated it. At first, it looked familiar, the same discipline, the same focus, the same refusal to give anything away. But there was something underneath it, something that did not belong to the past. Speed, intensity, a level of dominance that did not wait for the tournament to unfold. It forced it to, and that's where it changed. Because Jack built pressure slowly. He let it settle into the round. He let it grow until other players felt it without being able to explain why. Tiger brought the pressure with him. From the first tee, there was no time to adjust, no space to recover, no moment where the field could settle into its own rhythm, because Tiger dictated the pace immediately. And once he did, everything else had to follow. There were rounds where Jack would take control by staying within himself, by trusting that discipline would outlast everything else. Tiger did something more direct. He removed the possibility of a contest, not always, but often enough that it changed how the game was played, and that is a different kind of dominance, not measured only by wins, but by how early the outcome begins to feel inevitable. And that's where it stayed with Jack. Because this was not just a player who succeeded under pressure. This was a player who reshaped pressure itself. He carried more of it, from media, from expectation, from a global audience that did not exist in the same way before him, and instead of slowing down, he became sharper, faster, more decisive. Jack understood that. He understood what it meant to carry a standard across decades, to be the name others measure themselves against. And then he saw something else. A player who took that weight and made it look lighter. There are players who define greatness, and then there are players who make even that definition feel incomplete. Tiger Woods was one of them. There comes a point, late in a life like Jack Nicklaus lived, where the numbers no longer need to be defended. The records remain, the victories remain, the place in history remains. What changes is the need to hold on to them. Because when the competition is over, What stays are the moments that did not fit neatly into the record books. The players who did something different. The ones who forced you to see the game in a way you hadn't before. Not better careers. Not more titles. Something else. A different kind of greatness. One that could not always be controlled, or repeated, or even explained. And that is what makes the admission matter. Not because it lowers Jack Nicklaus, but because it reveals him. A man who spent a lifetime mastering the game, and still found in a few rare places something beyond mastery. 5 players. 5 different ways the game refused to stay within his control. And in the end, that may be the clearest measure of greatness there is, not how much you win, but how honestly you can recognize the moments you could not. Do you want me to refine the full script further for retention and production? There comes a point when a man like Jack Nicklaus no longer needs to be right. The trophies are already there, the records already written, the arguments already settled. Or at least, that's what people believe. But history has a way of simplifying things. It turns careers into numbers, rivalries into headlines, greatness into something easy to compare, and that's never how it felt when you were inside it. Because what stays with you isn't always the wins. It's the moments that didn't behave the way they were supposed to. The rounds where everything you trusted still wasn't enough. The players who didn't break when everyone else did. And the quiet realization that greatness does not come in one form. For years, Jack Nicklaus was the standard, the man others adjusted to, the man the game seemed to revolve around. If you wanted to understand pressure, you looked at him. If you wanted to understand control, you studied him. But even a standard can be challenged. Not all at once, not loudly, but in small, undeniable moments. A player who arrives exactly when the tournament turns. Another who refuses to follow the logic you rely on. One who sees shots you would never attempt. One who carries the weight of the crowd in a way you never needed. And one who takes everything you built and pushes it further than you thought possible. 5 different men. 5 different problems. 5 different ways. The game slipped outside his control, and that's what makes the admission matter. Not because he had to say it, but because he didn't. There is no reward for a legend to step back. No advantage in naming others as better, unless it's true. And maybe that's the final lesson hidden beneath all of it. Greatness is not just measured by how often you win, but by how clearly you can see the moments when you didn't, and still respect them, even decades later, even when no one is asking. That is not weakness, that is clarity. And in the end, that may be the one thing that never leaves a man like Jack Nicklaus.